My name is Diana Lovell, and I am 32 years old. 7 years ago, my mother and brother drained my entire college fund to finance a doomed luxury car rental startup. When I confronted them and took out student loans to finish my degree in forensic accounting, they laughed in my face. My brother looked at me and said, "Your degree is for losers," and that I would end up a miserable desk clerk. They cut me off, locked the doors of our Greenwich estate, and left me with nothing. I worked in silence for 7 years. Last month, the bank foreclosed on that very same estate. The debt was packaged and sold, and when my family finally realized who bought the deed to their home, the look of sheer terror on their faces was priceless. Before I tell you how I legally dismantled their fake empire, welcome to Sophia Told Stories. Please take a moment to like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your future. And tell me your age and where you are watching from in the comments below. Now let me take you to the driveway of a property I was banished from, holding a set of keys I earned with the exact degree they despised. The gravel crunched under the tires of my car as I pulled up to the sprawling, 3-story brick manor in Greenwich, Connecticut. The autumn wind bit through my tailored wool coat, but I did not feel the cold. I stood in front of the heavy oak double doors, staring at the brass handle. 7 years. It had been 7 years since my mother, Patricia, stood on this exact porch with her arms crossed over her cashmere sweater, watching me drag 2 trash bags filled with my belongings down the driveway. I remembered the smug smile on my older brother Bradley's face. He was 27 at the time, flush with the cash Patricia had liquidated from the family trust, the trust that was supposed to be split evenly between us. He used my half of the money to lease a fleet of exotic sports cars for a business model that any freshman finance student could see was a sinking ship. When I warned them about the liability, Patricia told me I was just jealous of my brother's entrepreneurial genius. Bradley told me to enjoy my life as a glorified calculator. They gambled everything on a delusion. I bet everything on myself. While they spent the next 7 years bleeding the remainder of the family accounts dry to maintain their country club aesthetic, I graduated at the top of my class. I started a boutique corporate liquidation firm. I built a quiet, highly lucrative fortune by restructuring bankrupt companies and buying up toxic debt. Which brought me back to this doorstep. The bank had seized the house 30 days ago. The property was supposed to be vacant, stripped bare, and ready for my contractors to begin renovations. I reached out and slid the fresh brass key into the deadbolt. The lock turned with a heavy, satisfying click. I pushed the door open, stepping into the grand foyer, expecting to be greeted by the hollow echo of an empty, foreclosed house. Instead, the warm scent of expensive catered food drifted down the hallway. Up ahead, in the formal dining room, I heard the distinct, sharp clinking of crystal champagne glasses and the sound of my brother laughing. The foyer of the Greenwich estate always felt like a museum curated to intimidate guests. Now it felt like a pristine crime scene. I stood perfectly still on the imported Italian marble, letting the heavy oak double doors click shut behind me. The air inside was stifling. The bank documents secured inside my leather briefcase stated this property was vacated 30 days ago. The foreclosure was finalized. The locks were supposed to be changed. Yet here I was, breathing in the undeniable scent of roasted lamb and expensive truffle oil. The crystal chandelier overhead cast a warm, arrogant glow over the sweeping mahogany staircase. I ran my gloved finger along the edge of the antique console table positioned near the coat rack. A thick layer of dust coated the polished wood. They were spending money on private catered lunches while ignoring the basic upkeep of a house they no longer owned. It was the perfect metaphor for the Lovell family dynamic. All show, zero substance. I did not storm into the formal dining room. I did not shout or announce my arrival. I simply unbuttoned my wool coat and listened. The sound of my brother laughing echoed down the long corridor. It was that same hollow, overconfident bark he used whenever he was trying to convince a room full of people that he was a visionary. 7 years ago, that exact bark chased me down the driveway. Bradley had just secured another $200,000 from our mother to fund a luxury concierge service that folded within 8 months. While he was busy renting yachts in Miami to project the image of a successful chief executive, I was sitting in a cramped library studying corporate tax law and unspooling complex financial ledgers. They called my degree a pursuit for the unremarkable. They thought success meant wearing designer labels and dropping names at the local country club. I learned very quickly that true power operates entirely in the shadows. I built my corporate liquidation firm from a single cramped desk into a restructuring juggernaut. I spent my days analyzing balance sheets, identifying toxic assets, and acquiring distressed debt for pennies on the dollar. I became the exact type of financial predator that bloated, ignorant, pseudo-entrepreneurs like my brother feared most. The ultimate irony was currently playing out right in front of me. The bank had flagged the Lovell estate as a critically delinquent asset 6 months ago. Patricia had taken out a third mortgage to keep Bradley's latest cryptocurrency scheme afloat. When the entire house of cards collapsed under the weight of his incompetence, the bank seized the property. My holding company purchased the debt portfolio through a blind trust. They had no idea the faceless corporate entity that now held the deed to their ancestral home was the very daughter they discarded. They were illegally squatting under my roof. I took a slow, deliberate step down the hallway. The walls were lined with the same oil paintings Patricia used to brag about at her garden parties. I noticed a slight discoloration near the ceiling, a water stain they could no longer afford to fix. The illusion of old money was cracking. Just before I reached the arched entrance to the formal dining room, a bright, unnatural light flared from the adjacent parlor. I paused, letting the shadows conceal me. A woman stepped into the corridor holding a smartphone attached to a blinding ring light. It was Jessica. Bradley married her 3 years ago. I had only seen her face on social media, but her manufactured aesthetic was unmistakable. She wore a silk slip dress that belonged at an evening cocktail party, not a Tuesday afternoon at home. Her hair was styled into effortless waves that likely took 2 hours and a professional stylist to achieve. She was spinning slowly, panning the camera across the intricate woodwork of the hallway, wearing a rehearsed, plastic smile. "Hello, my beautiful followers," Jessica chimed. Her voice was pitched an octave higher than normal to sound sweet and relatable. "Welcome to another day in the life. So many of you have been asking for a house tour of the family estate. I am so blessed to marry into such incredible generational wealth." Bradley and I are just sitting down to a private, catered lunch, but I wanted to show you all the original molding in this hallway. It is just a testament to maintaining high standards and surrounding yourself with luxury. If you buy my masterclass linked in the bio, you can learn how to manifest this exact lifestyle. I watched her lie to her audience with breathtaking ease. Generational wealth. The phrase tasted like ash. There was no wealth left. The trust was empty. The bank accounts were overdrawn. The very wall she was showing off to her digital fans belonged to me. She was standing in a foreclosed property pretending to be a queen while actively committing criminal trespass to sell a fraudulent online course. She was shifting the camera angle carefully, ensuring the lens did not capture the peeling wallpaper near the baseboards. She was curating a lie. Jessica kept talking into the lens, offering vapid advice about manifesting success and maintaining a luxury mindset. She turned on her designer heel, sweeping the ring light toward the archway where I stood. The blinding white light washed over my face, illuminating my tailored suit and the briefcase hanging from my hand. I did not blink. I did not move. I just stared directly into the camera lens with the cold, analytical detachment of an auditor inspecting a forged document. Jessica froze. The sweet, relatable influencer persona evaporated in a single instant. Her jaw dropped, and the color drained from her perfectly contoured face. She lowered the ring light, squinting into the shadows to process the reality of what she was seeing. "Diana," she gasped. The fake pitch of her voice dropped into a harsh, guttural tone. "What are you doing here? How did you get past the security gate?" I stepped out of the shadows and into the center of the hallway. The click of my heels echoed sharply against the marble floors, cutting through the silence. I did not raise my voice. I kept my posture rigid and my expression entirely blank. "I am here to take inventory, Jessica," I replied. My tone was icy and precise. "You are standing in the middle of a hallway that no longer belongs to you." Jessica's eyes darted from my face to the heavy front doors, her initial shock quickly mutating into a fierce, defensive rage. She gripped her phone tightly, her knuckles turning white. The delusion she had built for her followers was bleeding into her actual reality. She genuinely believed she held the power in this room. "You have no right to be here," she hissed. She took a step forward, thrusting her chin out in a pathetic attempt to physically intimidate me. "This is private property. You were kicked out of this family years ago. You are trespassing, Diana. I am calling the police right now and having you dragged out of my house in handcuffs." The shrill pitch of Jessica's screaming echoed off the vaulted ceiling of the grand foyer. Her threat to call the police hung in the air, sharp and desperate. Before I could even formulate a response to her theatrical display, the heavy mahogany doors of the formal dining room swung open, hitting the wall with a dull thud. Patricia stepped into the hallway. My mother wore a pearl necklace and a tailored tweed blazer, an ensemble meticulously chosen to project an aura of old money and untouchable grace. Yet, looking closely, the edges of her sleeves were frayed. The pearls lacked the heavy luster of genuine saltwater spheres. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me standing there. The polite, gracious hostess smile she had likely been practicing for her daughter-in-law's video vanished in an instant. "Diana," Patricia gasped, pressing a manicured hand to her chest as if my mere presence was a physical assault. "What is the meaning of this? How did you get past the security gate? We revoked your access code 7 years ago." I stood my ground, my posture relaxed but commanding. I let her panic fill the space between us. Patricia took a cautious step forward, her eyes darting toward Jessica, who was still clutching her smartphone like a weapon. The imported Italian marble beneath our feet felt freezing, a stark contrast to the warm scent of roasted lamb drifting from the dining room. They were spending money on private catered lunches while ignoring the basic upkeep of a house they no longer owned. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here," Patricia hissed, her voice trembling with a familiar, deep-seated indignation. "You were disowned. You chose to walk away from this family to pursue that pathetic accounting degree instead of supporting your brother. Now you break into my home while we are hosting a private lunch? Get out before I have you arrested for breaking and entering." I did not flinch at the threat of law enforcement. Instead, my mind drifted briefly to a phone call I received exactly 72 hours ago. I was sitting in my corner office overlooking the Manhattan skyline when my private wealth manager, a senior partner at an elite firm, dialed my direct line. He informed me that the Greenwich property had officially hit the auction block. Patricia had taken out a second mortgage, then a third equity line of credit, desperately trying to keep Bradley's failing cryptocurrency platform afloat. When the digital market turned, the bank called the loans. The estate was entirely underwater. The bank bundled the toxic debt into a commercial portfolio and sold it off to the highest bidder to clear their ledgers. My holding company purchased that exact portfolio for pennies on the dollar through a blind trust. Patricia had no idea her ancestral home was legally transferred to the daughter she discarded. "I am not breaking and entering, Patricia," I replied smoothly, bringing my attention back to the peeling wallpaper of the hallway. "I am simply conducting a routine walkthrough of a foreclosed asset." Before Patricia could process the weight of my words, slow, mocking applause echoed from the dining room. Bradley sauntered into the corridor. He wore a crisp linen shirt, unbuttoned slightly at the collar, holding a crystal flute of champagne in his right hand. He looked exactly the same as he did 7 years ago, cloaked in unearned confidence and funded by someone else's money. "Well, look who finally decided to crawl back," Bradley sneered, taking a leisurely sip of his drink. I guess auditing tax returns did not turn out to be the glamorous life you thought it would be. Are you here to ask for a loan, Diana? Because you picked a really bad time to interrupt our celebration. He stepped up beside his wife, placing a reassuring hand on Jessica's shoulder. He looked me up and down, his eyes scanning my tailored suit and the leather briefcase at my side. He was clearly searching for a flaw, a sign of the failure he had predicted for me. Finding none, he resorted to his favorite defensive tactic, pure condescension. Listen, Bradley continued, adopting a tone of faux sympathy that made my skin crawl. My new crypto token is launching next week. The pre-sale numbers are off the charts. We have institutional investors lining up. We are about to pay off the remaining balance on this house and remodel the entire east wing to build a proper streaming studio for Jessica. I am in a generous mood today. If you are struggling to make your rent, I can write you a pity check right now. Just take the cash, walk out the front door, and never come back. We have an elite image to maintain, and a struggling desk clerk does not fit the brand. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a silver pen, genuinely believing he held the upper hand in this negotiation. He thought I was a desperate woman begging for scraps from his table. He had no idea the table, the chairs, and the very floorboards he stood on belonged entirely to my corporation. I watched him click the pen, the sharp metallic sound ringing in the tense silence of the corridor. You are offering to write me a check from an overdrawn account to leave a property you do not own, I stated, keeping my voice perfectly level. That is a fascinating business strategy, Bradley. Did you learn that during your failed exotic car rental venture, or is this a new technique you developed for your imaginary crypto launch? Bradley scoffed, his face flushing a deep, ugly shade of red. The smirk vanished from his lips. What are you talking about? This is the Lovell estate. My name is on the trust. I am the sole heir to this property. You really have lost your mind, Diana. You are just bitter because you chose the wrong path and ended up with nothing. Jessica raised her phone again, ensuring the camera lens was pointed directly at my face. The ring light cast harsh shadows across the walls. I am recording this, she threatened, her voice shaking slightly, but laced with venom. You are harassing us on private property. We told you to leave. Mom, call the police right now. I want her removed by force. This is criminal trespassing, and I want to press charges. Patricia pulled her cell phone from her tweed blazer, her fingers fumbling over the screen. You brought this on yourself, Diana, she warned, glaring at me with a mixture of fear and profound disgust. I am dialing 911. I will not let you ruin our afternoon with your delusional jealousy. We gave you a chance to leave quietly. I did not ask her to stop. I did not raise my hands in surrender. I did not attempt to explain the mechanics of real estate law to people who refuse to understand basic arithmetic. Instead, I unclasped the brass latch of my designer tote bag. I reached inside and retrieved a thick manila folder. The heavy parchment paper inside contained the finalized foreclosure deed, the official transfer of title, and the acquisition documents bearing the raised seal of the state of Connecticut. I held the folder in my hand, letting the undeniable weight of the legal documents rest against my palm. Please, Patricia, dial the number, I encouraged her, my tone devoid of any hesitation or fear. Tell the dispatcher you have an intruder. Tell them to send their fastest officers to this exact address. Patricia paused, her thumb hovering over the keypad. The sheer, unshakable confidence in my voice caused a flicker of genuine doubt to cross her eyes. She looked at the manila folder, then back up at my face. Bradley stopped twirling his silver pen. Even Jessica lowered her ring light a fraction of an inch, unnerved by my chilling calm. Why would you want the police here? Bradley demanded, his arrogant facade cracking just enough to reveal the rising panic underneath. Are you trying to get yourself arrested just to embarrass us in front of the neighbors? Is that your grand plan? I stepped closer, closing the physical distance between us. I looked directly into my brother's eyes, watching the dawning realization that he had severely miscalculated the situation. I want the police here, Bradley, because I want law enforcement present when I open this folder, I replied, tapping the thick stack of papers against my palm. I want uniformed officers standing in this foyer when I prove that your trust is bankrupt, your crypto launch is a mirage, and your family is illegally squatting in my house. Make the call, Patricia. We have a lot of paperwork to review. The minutes following my demand stretched into an agonizing quiet. Nobody moved. The grandfather clock in the corner of the foyer ticked with rhythmic precision, counting down the seconds until the illusion shattered. Patricia stood frozen, her thumb still resting on her smartphone screen. She had called my bluff and found only a steel wall. Jessica kept her ring light aimed in my direction, but her hands shook, creating a nervous tremble in the shadows cast against the antique wallpaper. She was capturing every moment of her own impending humiliation for her followers, but she lacked the self-awareness to turn the camera off. Bradley drained the rest of his champagne. The bravado he projected moments earlier began to curdle into visible anxiety. He set the crystal flute down on a side table, leaving a damp ring on the polished wood. Sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the crisp autumn air. The sound grew louder, echoing off the manicured hedges of the estate, until the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the frosted glass transom above the front doors. Heavy footsteps approached the porch, followed by 3 sharp knocks that seemed to rattle the very foundation of the house. My mother moved first. In the span of 3 seconds, I watched Patricia shed the skin of a furious, entitled hostess and adopt the fragile posture of a terrified victim. It was a masterful transformation. She rounded her shoulders, let her lower lip tremble, and pulled the heavy oak door open just enough to reveal her distressed face. "Oh, thank goodness you are here, officers," Patricia wept, pressing a hand to her chest. She stepped aside, allowing 2 uniformed patrolmen to enter the foyer. She pointed a manicured finger directly at me. "It is my daughter. She has been estranged from this family for 7 years due to her severe mental instability. We were having a quiet, private lunch, and she broke in. She is threatening us, demanding money, trying to extort her own family. Please, you have to remove her before she hurts someone." The 2 officers, a seasoned veteran with graying temples and a younger rookie, shifted their stances. Their hands hovered near their utility belts, assessing the threat level in the room. They looked at the crying elderly woman, the influencer wife shrinking into the background, and the tense brother. Then they looked at me. I did not match Patricia's hysteria. I stood perfectly still, my posture straight, my expression serene. I wore a tailored charcoal suit that projected undisputed authority, holding a pristine leather briefcase. I looked less like a home invader and more like a senior auditor arriving to shut down a corrupt corporation. I knew arguing with a master manipulator like my mother in front of law enforcement was a losing battle. Let her spin her web. I had the blade to cut it down. "Ma'am," the older officer asked, stepping toward me, "is this true? Do you have permission to be on this property?" I did not waste my breath defending myself against Patricia's fabricated narrative. I simply opened the manila folder I had been holding. I retrieved a clipped stack of heavy parchment papers and extended them toward the veteran officer. "I do not need permission to stand in my own foyer, officer," I replied, my voice calm and resonant. "I am the sole owner of this estate. The people you see behind you are illegal squatters who defaulted on their mortgages and lost this property to the bank 30 days ago. My holding company acquired the deed on Friday." The veteran officer frowned, taking the documents. The foyer descended into a suffocating stillness as he reviewed the paperwork. I watched his eyes scan the raised state seals, the official transfer of title, and the notarized signatures from the bank executives. The airtight legal proof of my ownership was undeniable. He flipped to the second page, verifying the exact address and the name of my corporate entity. He lowered the papers and turned his gaze toward my family. The sympathy he initially held for Patricia evaporated, replaced by stern, professional irritation. "Ma'am," the officer said, addressing my mother. "These documents are official foreclosure and acquisition records. The bank seized this house a month ago. You are no longer the owners. You have no legal right to be on these premises." Patricia let out a strangled gasp, clutching the edge of the console table as if the floor had suddenly tilted beneath her. Her carefully constructed facade of generational wealth crumbled into dust right in front of the local authorities. Jessica lowered her phone, her mouth hanging open, her influencer persona destroyed by the harsh reality of her husband's financial ruin. The life she was selling to her followers was officially a sham. But Bradley did not collapse. The golden child who had spent his entire life avoiding consequences refused to accept defeat. Bradley's ability to lie under pressure was a skill he honed during his failed business ventures. When his luxury car rental company bled cash, he falsified revenue reports to secure more funding from our mother. He operated on the assumption that if you act confident enough, people will accept your lies as truth. He was applying that exact same strategy to the local police department right now. He stepped forward, a sickeningly confident grin spreading across his face. He reached into the inner pocket of his linen shirt and withdrew a neatly folded piece of paper. "Officer, there has been a significant misunderstanding," Bradley stated, adopting his smooth, entrepreneurial pitch voice. He handed the paper to the veteran patrolman. "It is true the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings, but we negotiated a settlement before the debt was sold to my sister's firm. The previous asset manager signed a 5-year residential lease, allowing my family to remain on the premises as caretakers to maintain the historic value of the property." My eyes narrowed. I knew every line of the acquisition file. There was no lease. The bank wanted the property vacated and liquidated as fast as possible. Bradley was handing the police a forged document. He had likely downloaded a generic template from the internet, typed up a fabricated agreement, and forged a bank executive's signature just to buy himself time. The officer unfolded the paper. I could see the printed logo of the original lending institution at the top, clearly copied and pasted from a low-resolution web image. It was a pathetic, desperate forgery, but to a patrol officer responding to a domestic disturbance call on a Tuesday afternoon, it presented a bureaucratic nightmare. The officer sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked at the lease, then back at my pristine deed. Jessica, seeing her husband take control, raised her phone again, her confidence returning. She was ready to spin this interaction into a narrative about fighting against predatory corporate landlords. Patricia stood a little taller, wiping away her fake tears, realizing her son had just handed them a lifeline. "Ma'am," the officer said, turning back to me, holding both sets of papers, "this complicates things. I have a valid deed showing your company owns the property, but I also have a signed lease agreement granting them tenancy. If you are claiming this lease is fraudulent, we cannot verify that here today. We are patrol officers, not a civil court judge." "What are you saying?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral, despite the fire igniting in my chest. "I am saying this is now a civil dispute over landlord and tenant rights," the officer explained, handing my deed back to me. "Since they have established residency and presented a lease, we cannot forcibly evict them today. You will have to file a formal eviction notice through the county housing court. Until a judge rules on the validity of this lease, they are legally allowed to stay on the property." Bradley let out a low, triumphant chuckle. He stepped closer to me, leaning in so only I could see the sheer arrogance radiating from his eyes. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had found the perfect loophole to trap me outside the gates of my own castle while he continued to live rent-free inside it. He crossed his arms, looking like a king who had just successfully defended his throne with a piece of printer paper. The veteran officer extended his hand, returning the pristine deed to my grasp. His expression conveyed a mixture of bureaucratic fatigue and silent apology. He had his hands tied by state protocol, bound by the mere existence of a printed piece of paper containing a fabricated signature. Bradley did not attempt to hide his triumph. He let out a low, breathy chuckle, shifting his weight onto his back heel like a prize fighter who had just won a grueling round. Patricia exhaled a sharp breath, her shoulders dropping an inch as the immediate threat of handcuffs dissolved. Jessica, realizing the police were not going to drag her out of the foyer, raised her smartphone again. Her influencer persona reignited instantly, ready to capture the moment the evil corporate landlord was sent packing by the resilient family. I did not argue with the patrolman. Arguing with local police over civil code is a tactic reserved for amateurs who lack leverage. I nodded once, a crisp, professional acknowledgement of their limitations. I slipped the heavy parchment deed back into my leather briefcase and secured the brass latch. The metallic click echoed in the tense foyer. I turned my attention to my brother. He wore a sickeningly triumphant grin, his eyes alight with the delusion that he had just outmaneuvered me. He truly believed his internet template lease was a masterstroke of legal genius. "You think you are so clever, Diana," Bradley sneered, leaning closer to ensure the police could not hear his taunt. "But you always lacked vision. You bring a piece of paper to a fight, and I bring a shield. Run back to your little cubicle. I hear the courts are backed up for 12 months. Enjoy paying the property taxes while we enjoy the view." I held his gaze, my features locked in a mask of terrifying serenity. I did not raise my voice, nor did I adopt his mocking tone. I spoke with the clinical precision of a surgeon diagnosing a terminal condition. "A forged signature on a bank document carries a rather steep price, Bradley," I stated softly. "It upgrades a simple civil dispute into a felony jurisdiction." Bradley scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Prove it. You are a glorified bookkeeper. You do not have the capital or the stamina to bleed us out in a courtroom. We are staying." He was projecting his own financial ruin onto me. He still pictured the desperate 25-year-old girl carrying trash bags down the driveway, rather than the chief executive standing before him. He assumed my resources were as finite as his own. I did not correct his miscalculation. A cornered opponent who feels safe is an opponent who will inevitably make a fatal mistake. "Enjoy the lamb," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "Savor every bite. It will be the last expensive meal you consume outside of a holding cell." I turned on my heel and walked toward the heavy oak doors. I did not look back at Patricia, who was already ushering the officers toward the exit with fake gratitude. I did not glance at Jessica, whose camera lens tracked my departure. I simply pushed the door open and stepped out into the crisp autumn afternoon. The walk down the sweeping gravel driveway felt entirely different than it had 7 years prior. Back then, my chest burned with the sting of rejection and the terrifying uncertainty of my future. Today, my pulse remained steady. I approached my vehicle parked just outside the wrought iron security gates. It was a custom-ordered armored SUV, painted a deep, unremarkable charcoal. It did not flash with the ostentatious chrome Bradley preferred for his leased sports cars. It was a rolling fortress, designed for discretion and security. I opened the heavy door and climbed into the driver's seat. The cabin was soundproof, instantly sealing away the noise of the wind and the distant traffic. I sat in the hushed interior for a long moment, my hands resting lightly on the leather steering wheel. The natural impulse for anyone locked out of their own multi-million-dollar property would be fury. They would pound on the steering wheel, scream into the void, or call a real estate attorney to draft an immediate eviction notice. I did none of those things. I calculated. Filing an eviction notice in a Connecticut housing court was a trap. The system was a bureaucratic swamp engineered to protect occupants. Bradley knew this. He anticipated a drawn-out, agonizing civil battle where he could file endless extensions, claim financial hardship, and live rent-free while systematically destroying the historic fixtures of my home. If I played by the rules of landlord and tenant law, I would surrender months of my life to a broken system. I refused to play a rigged game. I required a mechanism that bypassed the civil docket entirely. I reached for the secure terminal integrated into the dashboard and initiated a call to my lead corporate counsel, Marcus. The line connected on the first ring. "Diana," Marcus answered, his voice crisp and alert. "Did the walkthrough proceed as scheduled?" "The property is currently occupied by hostile squatters operating under a forged lease agreement," I informed him, skipping the pleasantries. I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Understood. I will draft the eviction filings immediately and request an expedited hearing based on fraudulent documentation." "No," I commanded, my tone unwavering. "Do not file anything in housing court. Stand down." Marcus paused, clearly confused by the directive. "Diana, if we do not initiate the eviction, they establish deeper residency. They could claim tenant rights." "Let them," I replied. "Let them feel secure. Let them use that forged document. A civil judge will slap them with a fine and an eviction date. That is insufficient. I am shifting this to a criminal jurisdiction." I ended the call and dialed a second number. This line belonged to Silas, an elite private operative who specialized in forensic asset tracing and white-collar investigations. Silas was a ghost in the financial sector, a man capable of unearthing buried shell companies and offshore accounts faster than a federal agency. "Silas, I need a comprehensive autopsy," I said the moment he answered. "Target names are Bradley Lovell and Jessica Lovell." "Give me the parameters," Silas responded, his keyboard already clicking in the background. "I want every credit inquiry, every bank statement, every loan application filed within the last 90 days. I want to know who is funding her lifestyle influencer facade. More importantly, I want to know what they are using my address for." I explained my hypothesis. People like Bradley and Jessica do not forge a lease simply to secure a place to sleep. They possessed an insatiable hunger for unearned capital. They required a prestigious address to project wealth, and they needed that projection to secure funding. A forged lease was merely a symptom of a much larger infection. They were leveraging my property to steal from someone else. Silas absorbed the information with clinical efficiency. If they use a fabricated lease to establish residency for a bank loan, they cross federal lines, he noted. "Exactly," I confirmed. "Find the federal crime, Silas. Follow the debt. I want the dossier on my desk within 48 hours. I disconnected the call and shifted the SUV into drive. I steered the heavy vehicle away from the gates of the estate, leaving my family to celebrate their temporary victory. They believed they had won a war of attrition. They failed to realize I had merely stepped back to allow them enough rope to hang themselves. The drive back to Manhattan was smooth, the tires humming a steady rhythm against the asphalt. My mind organized the incoming data, structuring the trap that would dismantle their lives. I was operating in the shadows, moving with silent, lethal precision. But my sister-in-law was incapable of silence. As I crossed the state line, the encrypted mobile device resting in the center console illuminated. A notification chimed, breaking the quiet of the cabin. It was an automated alert I had established months ago to monitor mentions of my corporate holding company. I tapped the screen at the next red light. The alert linked directly to a newly uploaded video on a major social media platform. The thumbnail featured Jessica's face, streaked with carefully curated tears, standing in the foyer of my estate. The title of the post read, "My billionaire sister-in-law is trying to make my family homeless." The digital guillotine had just been raised. The battlefield was shifting from the marble floors of my property to the ruthless, unfiltered court of public opinion. My phone vibrated again, followed by another chime, and then a relentless cascade of notifications as the smear campaign officially commenced. My morning routine is built on precision. I wake up at 5, review global market closures, and drink black coffee while looking out over the Manhattan skyline from the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. It is a quiet, controlled environment, engineered to keep the noise of the world at bay. But the following morning, the noise breached the perimeter. My phone, resting on the kitchen island, began to vibrate. It did not ring once or twice. It convulsed. Notifications poured in with such rapid succession that the screen became a continuous blur of incoming data. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. The assault was entirely digital, orchestrated by a woman who treated social media as a weapon of mass distortion. Jessica had gone to war. I tapped the first notification, which linked directly to a newly uploaded video on her primary social media channel. The thumbnail featured a black and white filter. Jessica was sitting on the floor of my foyer, clutching her knees to her chest, looking directly into the camera lens with wide, tear-filled eyes. The caption read, "Corporate greed is stealing my family home." I pressed play and watched the fabrication unfold. Jessica is a master of the victim narrative. The video was edited with ruthless efficiency. She omitted the forged lease, the defaulted loans, and the years of financial negligence. Instead, she painted a heartbreaking portrait of a young, struggling family being targeted by a vindictive, estranged sister-in-law. She cried on cue, a single tear rolling down her cheek, as she described how an evil corporate entity had used legal loopholes to rip the roof from over her head. She filmed the nursery, highlighting an empty crib, leveraging the emotional weight of a theoretical child to garner maximum sympathy. The comment section was an online horde out for blood. Thousands of strangers were demanding my identity, calling for my business to be boycotted, and throwing around terms like "eat the rich" and "corporate parasite." Jessica had expertly tapped into the collective outrage of the internet, directing a fire hose of public fury straight at my holding company. The public backlash was merely the first wave. The second wave came from within my own bloodline. My phone began registering calls from area codes I had not seen in 7 years. The extended family network, the aunts, uncles, and cousins, who had remained entirely silent when I was banished from the estate, suddenly found their voices. I did not answer a single call. I let them go straight to voicemail, watching the audio transcriptions populate on my screen. Aunt Barbara, my mother's older sister, left a 2-minute tirade. She accused me of being a heartless monster, demanding to know how I could sleep at night, knowing I was rendering my own mother homeless. Thus, and Richard, who borrowed $5,000 from Patricia 10 years ago and never paid it back, sent a text calling me a sociopath. They did not ask for my side of the story. They did not inquire about the legal reality of the foreclosure. They simply fell in line behind the matriarch, eager to punish the scapegoat who dared to rise above her assigned station. They wanted me to feel the crushing weight of their collective disapproval. They expected me to crumble, to draft a frantic public apology, or to sign the house back over just to stop the barrage of hatred. I poured myself another cup of coffee and leaned against the marble counter. Any ordinary person would have felt a suffocating sense of panic. They would have rushed online to defend their character, posting receipts and legal documents to prove the eviction was lawful. But engaging with an internet mob is akin to negotiating with a hurricane. You cannot reason with a storm. You can only secure your property and wait for it to pass. I knew that posting a rebuttal would only feed the algorithm, giving Jessica the engagement metrics she desperately craved. Silence is the ultimate starvation tactic. By refusing to acknowledge the smear campaign, I denied her the dramatic conflict necessary to sustain the narrative. I set my phone to Do Not Disturb, filtering all non-essential contacts into a hidden folder. I let them scream into the void. Their outrage meant nothing to me because their approval had never protected me. I was not playing a public relations game. I was preparing a legal execution. As I finished my coffee, a specialized encrypted chime echoed from my laptop sitting on the dining table. It was the designated alert for Silas, my private investigator. I walked over and opened the secure email server. The subject line contained only one word: escalation. I clicked the attached file. Silas did not send me a summary of the social media hate. He sent me the financial mechanics running beneath it. Jessica's tearful video was not merely a cry for attention. It was a highly calculated marketing funnel. Silas had tracked the links embedded in her profile. At the very bottom of her lengthy, heartbreaking caption, hidden just below the fold, was a hyperlink to a crowdfunding platform. The campaign was titled Save the Lovell Estate. Jessica had set a funding goal of $200,000. She claimed the money would be used to hire an elite legal defense team to fight the predatory corporate takeover of her ancestral home. She was soliciting donations from her outraged followers, converting their misplaced empathy into cold, hard cash. I scrolled through the campaign details, reading the updates Jessica had already posted. She claimed the funds were going directly into an escrow account to fight the eviction. But Silas had traced the routing numbers. The donations were not flowing into a protected legal trust. They were being deposited directly into a personal checking account registered under Bradley's name. Within 12 hours, the campaign had already generated over $30,000 from unsuspecting strangers. The sheer audacity of the scheme was breathtaking. They were using my stolen property as a stage set to defraud the public. They were monetizing their illegal occupation. The pieces of the puzzle were snapping together with terrifying clarity. This was never just about a place to live. It was about sustaining a fraudulent cash flow. I closed the laptop, a cold, predatory focus sharpening my senses. My brother and his wife thought they were playing a game of social checkers, using internet sympathy to outmaneuver a corporate landlord. They failed to realize they had just stepped onto a federal chessboard. Soliciting funds under false pretenses across state lines using a digital platform is a textbook definition of wire fraud. They were not just lying to their family anymore, they were lying to the public, and they were generating taxable, illicit revenue from those lies. The forged lease was the bait, and the crowdfunding campaign was the trap snapping shut on their own ankles. I picked up my phone and opened a direct, secure line to my contact at the United States Attorney's Office. The local police could not evict them based on a fake lease, but a federal prosecutor would gladly seize the property and everyone inside it for running a coordinated financial scam. The internet wanted a villain, and I was about to give them a spectacular show. The digital dossier provided by Silas was not a simple background check. It functioned as a forensic autopsy of a dying family dynasty. I sat alone in my home office holding a cup of black coffee and pored over the 50-page encrypted file. The ambient light of the city glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across my desk. My brother had always projected the aura of a self-made titan. The data presented a remarkably different reality. Bradley had not generated a single dollar of legitimate taxable income in half a decade. Following the spectacular implosion of his exotic car rental company, he pivoted his ambitions toward the decentralized finance sector. He launched a cryptocurrency token promising retail investors revolutionary returns. Silas uncovered the smart contract architecture underlying the project. It lacked any actual utility. It was a classic Ponzi structure, designed to enrich the founder while leaving early adopters holding worthless digital assets. The initial liquidity pool required to float the project did not come from venture capitalists. It came from Patricia. The ledger Silas unearthed showed a tragic but predictable flow of capital. My mother drained her remaining retirement accounts and subsequently took out the fatal sequence of mortgages on the Greenwich estate to fund his digital illusion. The funds were supposed to pay software developers and build network infrastructure. Instead, Silas tracked the outgoing wire transfers directly into fiat currency, routing straight into personal checking accounts. The bank statements showed staggering expenditures. Bradley spent $50,000 for a chartered flight to St. Barthélemy just to shoot promotional content. He dropped $20,000 a month on a leased penthouse in the city, using the skyline as a backdrop for his entrepreneurial videos before the landlord evicted them. They retreated to the Greenwich estate only when the stolen capital finally dried up. I traced every stolen dollar. Patricia sacrificed her future to fund their extended vacation. Yet the financial negligence was merely the prelude to the main event. Jessica was not just a passive beneficiary of my brother's incompetence. She was the active architect of their current survival strategy. Within the encrypted dossier, Silas had flagged a specific subfolder labeled Federal Applications. I clicked the icon, expecting to find a trail of maxed-out retail credit cards or high-interest payday loans. What I discovered was far more audacious. The file contained a 30-page application submitted to the Small Business Administration. The program was designed to offer federally backed capital to legitimate enterprises. Jessica had applied for a $250,000 commercial loan to launch a boutique luxury skincare line. To secure a federal loan of that magnitude, the applicant must demonstrate substantial verifiable collateral and a primary operating address. My eyes scanned the uploaded supporting documents, and my pulse quickened. There, resting in the digital file, was the exact same lease agreement Bradley had handed to the veteran patrol officer in my foyer. The breathtaking hubris of their strategy snapped into sharp focus. Jessica did not forge the lease simply to stall a local eviction or to trick a beat cop. She fabricated that document to defraud the United States government. She submitted fraudulent tax returns alongside the fake lease. She inflated her social media revenue, claiming her influencer brand generated 6 figures in monthly sales. The truth was, her engagement metrics were purchased from overseas click farms. The loan application was a masterclass in perjury. She listed the historic Greenwich estate as a manufacturing and distribution hub for her imaginary skincare products. She attempted to pledge the property equity as collateral for the startup capital. Silas had cross-referenced the timestamps. The application was transmitted from the estate Wi-Fi network 3 days before I arrived with my keys. They knew the bank had foreclosed. They knew the locks would soon be changed. They forged the lease in a desperate bid to secure federal funding before the reality of their bankruptcy became public record. She needed the $250,000 not to manufacture lotion, but to pay off the private lenders who were beginning to circle her husband. As a forensic accountant, I understood the precise legal threshold they had just crossed. Handing a forged piece of paper to a local police officer to prolong a domestic residential dispute constitutes a low-level misdemeanor. It usually results in a nominal fine and a future housing court date. However, transmitting a falsified legal document across state lines via a digital portal to secure federal funds triggers a catastrophic sequence of criminal charges. It constitutes wire fraud. It constitutes bank fraud. It meets every statutory requirement for aggravated identity theft. These are not minor infractions that can be settled with a civil penalty. These are federal felonies carrying mandatory minimum prison sentences. They believed they were playing a clever game of bureaucratic hide-and-seek. They thought the crowdfunding campaign and the social media sympathy would protect them from a corporate landlord. They failed to realize they had invited the federal government into their living room. I leaned back in my leather chair, the soft hum of the central heating, the only sound in the penthouse. I felt a profound sense of detachment. 7 years ago, I might have felt a pang of sorrow seeing the depths of their depravity. I might have tried to intervene to offer counsel or to save my mother from the consequences of her blind devotion to her son. But the girl who cried in the driveway was gone. The woman sitting in the penthouse viewed them merely as hostile actors in a corporate dispute. They were toxic liabilities that required liquidation. I did not need to wait for a sluggish housing court judge to grant an eviction order. I did not need to fight Jessica in the court of public opinion. I needed a federal prosecutor. I compiled the evidence with clinical precision. I merged the forged lease, the IP address, logs, the bank foreclosure deed, the fake tax returns, and the social media crowdfunding receipts into a single, comprehensive digital package. Every piece of data corroborated the central narrative. They were operating an active, ongoing financial scam from a stolen property. I drafted a secure communication to a contact I had cultivated over years of corporate liquidations. Prosecutor Sterling was a ruthless, efficient attorney operating within the Financial Crimes Division of the United States Attorney Office. He specialized in prosecuting high-net-worth individuals who believed their social standing exempted them from the law. He despised grifters, and he possessed the federal authority to dismantle them overnight. I attached the comprehensive dossier to the message. The subject line was sparse, containing only the legal statutes they had violated and the address of the estate. I pressed send. The data vanished into the encrypted ether. transferring the fate of my family from my hands into the machinery of the federal justice system. The trap was fully constructed, but I needed them to remain inside the house long enough for the authorities to organize a response. Silence remained my most potent weapon. I closed the laptop and prepared to wait. But patience was a virtue my brother never possessed. The social media campaign had emboldened him, filling his veins with a false sense of invincibility. He interpreted my lack of public retaliation as fear. He genuinely believed his internet mob and his forged lease had forced me into a corner. As the clock neared midnight, my phone illuminated on the desk. A text message arrived from Bradley. He was no longer satisfied with merely stealing my home and soliciting donations from sympathetic strangers. His greed compelled him to reach for more. He wanted to break me entirely. I picked up the device and read the incoming words. He demanded I transfer the deed of the house back into his name immediately. He claimed he possessed insider information regarding my corporate liquidations and threatened to report me to the Internal Revenue Service for tax evasion if I refused his terms. He thought he was playing a brilliant strategic hand. He did not know he had just documented his intent to commit extortion, wrapping a neat bow around the federal indictment heading his way. 7 days, 168 hours. That is the exact duration I maintained strict radio silence following my departure from the Greenwich estate. In the realm of psychological warfare, the absence of communication inflicts far more damage than a barrage of overt threats. My brother and his wife braced themselves for a loud, chaotic legal battle. They anticipated a knock on the door from a county sheriff holding a standard eviction notice. They prepared to leak court summons to their social media followers, painting themselves as resilient underdogs fighting a ruthless corporate machine. I denied them the satisfaction of a fight. I offered them a suffocating void instead. I sat in my penthouse library watching the city lights flicker through the rain-slicked glass. My encrypted mobile device rested on the polished walnut desk, illuminating the dark room with a single incoming notification. It was 11 o'clock at night. The sender was Bradley. The silence had finally broken his nerve. I picked up the device and read the block of text he transmitted. It was a frantic, rambling paragraph, stripped of his usual polished entrepreneurial charm. The message lacked any basic greeting, diving straight into a desperate, venomous ultimatum. He wrote that he had spent the last week digging into the background of my boutique restructuring firm. He claimed he possessed insider knowledge, proving my entire career was a facade, built on shadow accounting and illicit offshore tax shelters. He stated he had compiled a dossier of my alleged financial crimes and was preparing to forward the files directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. He offered me a single, narrow avenue of escape. If I voluntarily signed over a 50% equity stake in the Greenwich property and granted him permanent co-ownership, he would destroy the imaginary dossier and keep my secrets safe. He gave me 24 hours to transfer the deed. I read the extortion demand a second time, and a genuine, quiet laugh escaped my lips. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of his threat was breathtaking. Bradley was projecting his own lifelong pattern of criminality directly onto me. He operated under the assumption that every successful person must be cheating the system, because cheating was the only method he understood. He remembered the era when his luxury car rental business hemorrhaged capital. During that doomed venture, he routinely classified personal vacations to Monaco as corporate expenses and hid retail income in decentralized digital wallets to dodge federal taxes. He lived his entire adult life terrified of an audit, assuming the government was always one step behind him. He fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my profession. As the chief executive of a firm that acquires toxic debt and restructures bankrupt entities, my life is an open book to federal regulators. My holding company endures rigorous mandatory audits by independent financial oversight committees every single quarter. I maintain a pristine, transparent ledger because in the corporate liquidation sector, a single compliance violation spells permanent ruin. My tax filings are scrutinized by the very agencies he was threatening to contact. I possess the cleanest financial footprint in Manhattan. His threat was hollow, but the legal implications of his text message were fatal. By transmitting a demand for property in exchange for withholding alleged criminal information, Bradley crossed a definitive legal threshold. He committed felony extortion under federal law. He digitized his intent to blackmail, sending the written proof across state lines via cellular towers. He believed he was executing a brilliant strategic maneuver, a masterstroke of leverage that would force me to surrender my ancestral home. He failed to realize he had just gift-wrapped a signed confession and delivered it to his primary adversary. I did not reply to the message. Engaging with an extortionist only validates their delusion that they hold a position of power. I initiated a secure screen capture sequence, ensuring the timestamp, the sender identification, and the precise wording of his threat were perfectly preserved. I archived the images in 3 separate encrypted servers. I then forwarded the raw data file directly to Prosecutor Sterling at the United States Attorney Office, adding it to the mounting mountain of evidence detailing their ongoing criminal enterprise. The wire fraud, the bank fraud, the aggravated identity theft, and now felony blackmail. The indictment Sterling was drafting grew heavier with every passing hour. I leaned back in my leather chair, analyzing the desperation radiating from Bradley's message. A man only resorts to brazen extortion when his alternative funding sources evaporate. The Small Business Administration loan Jessica applied for using the forged lease was likely stalled in the underwriting process. Federal loans require rigorous identity verification and collateral checks. The algorithms monitoring those federal disbursements likely flagged the application due to Jessica's abysmal credit history and previous defaulted accounts. Without that $250,000 infusion, they were stranded. They possessed the keys to a mansion, but lacked the capital to maintain the lights, the heat, or the catered lunches. The wealthy influencer facade was cracking, and Bradley panicked. He needed equity he could borrow against to satisfy the private lenders breathing down his neck. I set the phone down, feeling a profound sense of closure. The trap was set. The evidence was secured, and the federal machinery was quietly aligning its sights on the Greenwich estate. I needed only to wait for the authorities to finalize the raid protocol. But the following morning, the narrative shifted, rendering my passive waiting strategy obsolete. I was reviewing a quarterly earnings report when a new notification chimed from my personal inbox. It was an email forwarded by an affluent client of mine, a prominent real estate developer who owned several properties in the Greenwich area. The subject line read, "Urgent request, save a historic legacy." I opened the email and felt the blood freeze in my veins. It was an elegant digital invitation designed with cursive gold typography set against a rich emerald background. Jessica and Bradley were cordially inviting the wealthiest residents of the county to an exclusive charity gala hosted at the Lovell Estate this coming Saturday evening. The description below the invitation detailed a heartbreaking fictional story. It claimed a predatory, faceless corporation was attempting to seize a historic family landmark using underhanded legal tactics. The gala was organized as an emergency fundraiser. They were asking attendees to purchase high-priced VIP tickets and participate in a silent auction to generate a legal defense fund. They promised an evening of fine dining, live classical music, and an impassioned presentation regarding the preservation of generational heritage. The brazen audacity paralyzed me for a fraction of a second. They were not simply squatting in my foreclosed property anymore. They were throwing a lavish party inside my stolen home. They were inviting my wealthy neighbors, my potential clients, and the local elite to drink my wine and listen to them solicit funds based on a fabricated tragedy. They intended to look their guests in the eye and ask for substantial monetary donations to fight the very woman who actually owned the floorboards beneath their feet. I read the fine print at the bottom of the digital invitation. They requested all charitable donations be routed directly to the same personal checking account Silas had flagged earlier in the week. The gala was an active live-action extension of their wire fraud scheme. They were escalating their digital grift into the physical world, believing their high society neighbors were gullible enough to fund their survival. My client had forwarded the invitation to me with a brief note attached, asking if my restructuring firm knew anything about the corporate takeover mentioned in the text. He assumed the Lovell family was genuinely under attack by a rogue hedge fund. I stared at the glowing screen, the quiet hum of the penthouse fading into the background. My initial instinct was to contact Prosecutor Sterling and demand he execute the arrest warrants immediately, before the gala could take place. I wanted the federal agents to kick the doors off the hinges before a single guest arrived. Then a cold, calculated realization washed over me. If the authorities raided the estate on a random Tuesday morning, Bradley and Jessica would be quietly arrested in their pajamas. They would undoubtedly spin the arrest later, claiming government overreach and corporate corruption. They would maintain their victim status within their social circles. But if the authorities raided the estate during the peak of their fraudulent fundraising gala, the impact would be irreversible. They would be marched out in handcuffs in front of the very people they were attempting to swindle. The high society crowd they so desperately craved would witness their ultimate humiliation firsthand. I picked up my phone and drafted a reply to my wealthy client. I thanked him for bringing the event to my attention. I informed him that my holding company was indeed familiar with the property in question, and that I personally intended to attend the gala to address the situation. I then clicked the registration link embedded in the invitation. I purchased a top-tier VIP ticket using my corporate entity name. I was not going to shut the party down. I was going to walk through the front doors wearing a designer gown and watch their entire illusion burn to ash. The brazen audacity of the charity gala provided the perfect focal point for my strategy. My mother and sister-in-law were not content with merely squatting in a foreclosed property. They required an audience. They needed the validation of the Greenwich elite to soothe their fragile egos and sustain their counterfeit reality. Taking $30,000 from sympathetic internet strangers under the guise of a legal defense fund was a crime. Taking that stolen money and immediately squandering it on an open bar, floral centerpieces, and a string quartet was a display of hubris so profound it practically guaranteed their ruin. I spent the next 48 hours coordinating the trap. I did not operate in a vacuum. I forwarded the digital gala invitation directly to Prosecutor Sterling at the United States Attorney Office. During our secure phone consultation, Sterling reviewed the event details with the clinical precision of a veteran investigator. He understood the strategic value of the gathering immediately. If federal agents arrested Bradley and Jessica on a random weekday morning, the defense attorneys would spin the narrative. They would claim the forged lease was a simple misunderstanding, and the GoFundMe campaign was a desperate plea for help from a family under duress. The defense would minimize the intent. Sterling explained that allowing the charity gala to proceed eliminated any room for reasonable doubt. By hosting a formal event, Bradley and Jessica were actively soliciting funds from high-net-worth individuals based on a fabricated tragedy. Every wealthy neighbor who wrote a check or placed a bid in the silent auction transformed into a direct victim of a federal fraud scheme. The act of pitching their imaginary legal battle to a room full of witnesses cemented the conspiracy charges. It elevated a paper crime into a live, orchestrated, and undeniable swindle. "We require them to take the stage," Sterling advised over the encrypted line. "We need them to look those donors in the eye and ask for capital while standing on property they do not own. The moment they solicit that money publicly, the wire fraud is sealed. My team will be waiting at the perimeter." I agreed to the terms. I promised to signal the agents the moment the fraudulent solicitation occurred. Securing my entry into the Lion Den was effortless. I registered for the event using a subsidiary shell company, Apex Liquidation Holdings. To my brother and mother, the name represented nothing more than another faceless corporate sponsor eager for a tax write-off. They happily processed my $5,000 VIP ticket purchase. They were so blinded by their own greed that they failed to conduct a basic background check on their highest-paying donor. They willingly charged the landlord for access to her own living room. The day of the gala arrived crisp and cold. The sky over Manhattan turned a deep, bruised violet as evening approached. I stood in the dressing room of my penthouse, preparing for the event. I was not dressing for a party. I was preparing armor for an execution. 7 years ago, I walked down the driveway of that estate wearing a faded college sweatshirt, dragging trash bags filled with textbooks and cheap clothing. I was terrified, heartbroken, and entirely alone. My family watched me leave with triumphant sneers, convinced I would fail in a world that did not hand out unearned privileges. Tonight, the discarded daughter was returning. I selected a floor-length emerald green gown tailored to perfection. It lacked the gaudy, attention-seeking sequins Jessica favored. It was architectural, sleek, and projected undeniable authority. I paired it with minimal jewelry, letting the sharp cut of the fabric speak for itself. I pulled my hair back into a severe, elegant style, ensuring nothing obscured my vision or my expression. I looked into the mirror and saw a woman who restructured failing empires before breakfast. Bradley and his counterfeit influencer wife were vastly out of their depth. My private chauffeur arrived precisely at 7 o'clock. I stepped into the spacious cabin of the sleek black town car, the tinted windows shielding me from the city lights. The drive north to Connecticut passed in a calm, meditative quiet. I reviewed the financial dossiers, the forged lease documents, and the federal statutes in my mind, ensuring every piece of leverage was secure. As the town car exited the highway and turned onto the familiar, winding, tree-lined roads of Greenwich, a faint glow illuminated the horizon. My mother had spared no expense with her stolen funds. We approached the wrought iron security gates of the estate. The gates, which had remained locked to me for 7 years, were thrown wide open to welcome the paying guests. Luminaries lined the sweeping gravel driveway, casting flickering shadows against the manicured hedges. A towering white canopy tent was visible on the back lawn, glowing with ambient golden light. The muted, elegant strains of a live cello drifted through the crisp night air. It was a beautiful, meticulously crafted lie. The chauffeur navigated the luxury vehicle up the incline, pulling to a smooth stop at the front entrance. A valet stand had been erected right at the base of the wide brick steps. Young men in matching crimson vests rushed forward to open the doors for the arriving donors. I watched through the tinted glass as a valet approached my side of the vehicle. He reached for the handle and pulled the heavy door open. The chilly autumn wind rushed into the heated cabin, carrying the scent of expensive perfume and roasted cedar. I stepped out of the town car, the emerald silk of my gown brushing against the polished gravel. The valet offered a polite, deferential nod, extending his hand to offer a claim ticket. I took the small slip of numbered paper, my fingers brushing against the cold cardstock. He climbed into the driver's seat of the town car, preparing to move it down the driveway. He smiled, thanking me for attending the fundraiser to save the historic property. He had no idea he was speaking to the chief executive who held the deed. He had no idea he was parking the true owner's vehicle outside a house scheduled for a federal raid. I turned my attention to the grand oak doors of the estate. The entrance was flanked by towering floral arrangements, and eager guests were flowing inside, ready to hand over their wealth to a family of grifters. I smoothed the fabric of my gown, raised my chin, and began the slow, deliberate ascent up the brick steps to reclaim my throne. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, sealing the crisp autumn air outside. I stood inside the grand foyer of the Greenwich estate, allowing my eyes to adjust to the blinding, artificial brilliance of the charity gala. The historic elegance of my ancestral home had been suffocated beneath layers of desperate, rented opulence. Shimmering metallic drapery hung from the vaulted ceilings, attempting to conceal the peeling paint near the crown molding. Towering centerpieces of imported white orchids dominated the entry tables, emitting a cloying, heavy fragrance meant to mask the undeniable scent of impending ruin. It was a theatrical production, designed to project an illusion of generational wealth. A string quartet played a frantic classical arrangement in the corner, their notes battling the low, wealthy murmur of the assembled crowd. I handed my coat to a hired attendant, my emerald silk gown cascading smoothly to the polished marble floor. I did not rush toward the main ballroom. I took my time calculating the exact metrics of their deception. Every floral arrangement, every crystal champagne flute, every catered delicacy represented another dollar stolen from sympathetic donors under federal wire fraud statutes. I glided past the sweeping mahogany staircase and entered the primary reception hall. The room was packed with the county elite. I recognized several faces in the crowd. There was a prominent real estate developer standing near the stone fireplace, a managing partner of a prestigious law firm mingling near the bar, and a local philanthropist who frequently funded historical preservation projects. These were highly influential individuals, titans of industry who prided themselves on their shrewd judgment. Yet tonight, they were willingly handing their capital to a family of amateur grifters. My gaze shifted to the front of the room. A temporary stage had been erected against the far wall, flanked by 2 digital projection screens, displaying a stylized, heartbreaking logo for the Legal Defense Fund. Jessica stood at the center of the podium, illuminated by a harsh spotlight. She wore a sequined silver gown that reflected the light like a disco ball, an outfit better suited for a nightclub than a high society fundraiser. She held a microphone in both hands, her posture expertly hunched to convey vulnerability. "We are standing on the edge of a precipice," Jessica announced to the silent, captivated audience. Her voice trembled with rehearsed theatrical grief. "This estate is not merely a collection of bricks and antique wood. It is a legacy. It is a sanctuary of heritage that has belonged to the Lovell family for decades. But tonight, that legacy is under attack by a ruthless, faceless corporate entity." I stood in the shadows near a marble pillar, a cool smirk playing on my lips. The faceless corporate entity she described was currently sipping sparkling water just 50 feet away. "They are using predatory loopholes to steal our home," Jessica continued, wiping a single, meticulously manufactured tear from her cheek. "My husband and I are fighting with every ounce of our strength to keep this roof over our heads. We are battling a cruel, estranged sister-in-law who has weaponized her corporate connections to render us destitute. She wants to pave over our history for a profit margin. We need your help to fund our legal defense. We need your investments to stop this tragedy." Her pitch was a masterclass in manipulation. She spun a narrative of victimization, painting herself as a brave defender of tradition while characterizing me as a dark, unfeeling villain. The wealthy donors nodded in sympathetic agreement. They reached into their tailored suit jackets and designer clutches, pulling out checkbooks and smartphones to access the digital donation portal. They had no idea they were funding a counterfeit lifestyle. They did not know Jessica spent the previous 5 years purchasing fake engagement metrics for her social media profiles, or that she currently drove a leased vehicle she could no longer afford. They were financing her delusion. I remained near the perimeter, watching the transaction of lies unfold. As my eyes scanned the crowd, they locked onto a familiar figure working the opposite side of the ballroom, Patricia. My mother wore a vintage designer suit, her neck adorned with the familiar pearl choker she always utilized to signal her societal standing. She was circulating among the donors, offering gracious smiles and accepting quiet condolences for her imaginary plight. She played the role of the stoic, beleaguered matriarch flawlessly. Then she turned her head. Her gaze swept across the room and collided directly with mine. The physical reaction was instantaneous and profound. The gracious, hosting smile fractured, dissolving into a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a pale, sickly gray against the dark fabric of her suit. She blinked rapidly, her mind struggling to process the impossible sight of her discarded daughter standing inside the fortress she believed she had secured. Patricia did not scream. She possessed too much pride to cause a scene in front of the Greenwich elite. Instead, she excused herself from a conversation with the hedge fund manager and began a rapid, purposeful march across the ballroom floor. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood, her eyes blazing with a feral, desperate fury. I did not retreat. I stood my ground, allowing her to close the distance. When she reached the shadow of the marble pillar, she leaned in close. The scent of her expensive perfume was overpowering, masking the sour tang of nervous sweat. "What in the world are you doing here?" Patricia hissed, her voice a venomous, strained whisper. Her hands trembled at her sides, her knuckles white. "How did you get past the door staff? You are not on the guest list." "I procured a VIP ticket, Patricia," I replied smoothly, my tone devoid of any emotional inflection. "I RSVP'd under the name Apex Liquidation Holdings. I understand you gladly processed my $5,000 contribution this morning." Patricia gasped, her eyes widening in horrific realization. "You bought a ticket to your own eviction party." "You are insane, Diana. This is a private charity event. You are going to ruin everything we have built." "You built nothing," I corrected her, keeping my voice low and lethal. "You printed a fake lease and threw a party with stolen funds." "I am not going to argue with you," Patricia snapped, her panic mutating into defensive hostility. She pointed a shaking finger toward the front doors. "You need to turn around and walk out that door right now. If you do not leave this instant, I will signal the private security team. They will drag you out by your hair in front of all these important people. I will tell them you are a deranged stalker. I will humiliate you, Diana. Do not test me." I observed the frantic, cornered energy radiating from her posture. She genuinely believed she still wielded authority over me. She thought she could banish me into the cold night just as she had done 7 years ago. She anticipated my compliance. She expected me to shrink away to avoid public embarrassment. I reached out as a hired waiter passed by with a silver tray. I calmly lifted a crystal flute of champagne from the polished surface. I held the glass up, watching the golden bubbles rise to the surface, before shifting my unwavering gaze back to my mother. "I am not leaving, Patricia," I stated, my voice echoing with icy, undeniable finality. In fact, I plan to stay for the entire evening, because I am not going to walk out that door until I personally step onto that stage and address my guests. Patricia stood frozen in the shadow of the marble pillar. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She resembled a fish pulled from the water, suffocating on the reality of her own powerlessness. I did not wait for her to recover her voice or attempt another pathetic threat. I handed my empty champagne flute to a passing waiter, offering a polite nod, and turned my back on the woman who gave birth to me. The path to the stage required navigating through the dense gathering of Greenwich elites. I moved with deliberate grace. My emerald silk gown swept across the polished hardwood, cutting a silent path through the sea of tailored tuxedos and designer evening wear. The guests naturally parted, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. They perceived the authority radiating from my posture, assuming I was a keynote speaker or a primary benefactor arriving to deliver a pivotal address. They were partially correct. Up on the temporary stage, Jessica was concluding her fraudulent pitch. Her voice reached a crescendo of manufactured sorrow, begging the audience to open their hearts and their portfolios to save a historic legacy from corporate ruin. She clutched the microphone with both hands, lowering her head to let her carefully styled hair shield her face, mimicking a moment of overwhelming grief. I reached the base of the wooden steps leading up to the podium. The string quartet, positioned just to the right of the platform, noticed my ascent. The cellist faltered, dragging his bow off-key, and the music slowly dissolved into an uncomfortable, hesitant silence. The sudden absence of the classical background score drew the attention of the entire ballroom. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward the front of the hall. Jessica lifted her head, her fake tears drying instantly as she registered the sudden quiet. She turned toward the stairs and saw me stepping onto the elevated platform. Her eyes widened into saucers of pure terror. The microphone trembled in her grip. She took a reflexive step backward, her silver sequined dress catching the harsh glare of the spotlight. She recognized the predator stepping into her meticulously curated enclosure, but her influencer instincts paralyzed her. She lacked the script for this interaction. I closed the final distance between us, extending my right hand. I did not snatch the microphone. I simply held my palm open, my gaze locking onto hers with terrifying stillness. Jessica surrendered the device without a single word of protest, her fingers going limp as the cold reality of her exposure set in. She backed away toward the edge of the stage, shrinking into the dark periphery. I stepped up to the acrylic podium and adjusted the microphone stand. The feedback whined for a fraction of a second before settling. The ballroom was breathless. The clinking of silverware ceased. The hushed murmurs of the wealthy donors evaporated. I looked out over the sea of expectant faces, recognizing the local titans of industry, the philanthropists, and the real estate developers who had opened their checkbooks mere minutes ago. "Good evening," I began, my voice projecting crisp and clear through the towering speakers. It resonated with the undeniable weight of empirical truth. "My name is Diana Lovell. Many of you received an invitation tonight detailing a heartbreaking narrative about a family fighting to save their ancestral home from a predatory corporate entity. You were told a story of victimization, of heritage under attack, and of desperate survival." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the front row. I saw the managing partner of the prestigious law firm tilt his head, his analytical mind already detecting the anomaly in the presentation. "That story is a masterclass in fiction," I stated, my tone dropping into a clinical, forensic cadence. "The predatory corporate entity described in your brochures is Apex Liquidation Holdings. I am the chief executive officer of that firm. I am also the daughter of Patricia Lovell and the sister of Bradley Lovell, the very individuals soliciting your charity this evening." A collective gasp rippled through the reception hall. It was a visceral sound of high society scandal unfolding in real time. I saw Patricia near the back of the room, attempting to sink behind a towering floral arrangement, her face drained of all color. "You were invited here under the pretense of funding a legal defense trust," I continued, wielding the facts like a scalpel. "You were led to believe your donations would prevent an eviction. Allow me to clarify the financial architecture of this estate. There is no pending legal battle. There is no corporate loophole. 30 days ago, the bank finalized the foreclosure of this property. The Lovell family defaulted on 3 separate mortgages, draining the equity to finance a failed cryptocurrency venture. My holding company acquired the toxic debt portfolio and currently holds the exclusive deed to the floorboards beneath your feet." The murmurs erupted into a wave of agitated whispers. Wealthy individuals despise nothing more than being played for fools. They guard their capital with ruthless efficiency, and I was revealing the exact mechanics of the swindle they had just funded. "The individuals hosting this gala are illegal squatters," I declared, raising the volume of my voice to slice through the rising commotion. "They forged a residential lease to stall the local authorities. They subsequently used that fabricated document to submit a fraudulent loan application to the Small Business Administration, attempting to pledge a property they do not own as federal collateral." I looked directly at the local philanthropist who frequently backed historic preservation efforts. I saw the distinct flash of anger in his eyes as he looked down at the checkbook still resting in his hand. "The funds you transferred tonight are not entering a protected legal escrow," I informed the crowd, delivering the final, devastating blow. "The routing numbers on your donation portals lead directly to a personal checking account. Your capital is not saving a legacy. Your money is financing wire fraud. You are actively funding a criminal enterprise." The ballroom descended into pure chaos. The elegant facade of the charity event shattered into a million jagged pieces. Donors began shouting, demanding refunds, pulling out their smartphones to cancel the digital wire transfers they had authorized moments prior. The atmosphere shifted from gracious philanthropy to predatory outrage. The high society guests realized they were the marks in a sophisticated con, and they turned their collective fury toward the hosts. Jessica stood frozen in the shadows of the stage, her hands covering her mouth, her influencer empire dissolving into an irrevocable nightmare. She watched the wealthy elite, the people she so desperately wanted to impress, turn into an angry mob. Then, from the far side of the reception hall, a roar of primal, unhinged fury erupted. Bradley broke through the crowd. He shoved a prominent real estate developer aside, his face flushed a deep, mottled purple. The smug, entrepreneurial confidence he wore like a shield was entirely gone, replaced by the chaotic desperation of a cornered animal. His carefully styled hair was disheveled, and his linen shirt clung to his sweating frame. He realized his life was over. The crypto scheme was exposed, the fake lease was public knowledge, the federal loan fraud was laid bare in front of the most powerful people in Connecticut. He lost everything in the span of 3 minutes, and he directed every ounce of his burning rage at the woman standing on the podium. "Shut your mouth," Bradley screamed, his voice cracking under the strain. He stormed toward the front of the room, his eyes locked onto me with a lethal intensity. He ignored the shocked gasps of the guests, trampling over the floral arrangements lining the aisle. "You ruined my life. You stole my house. I will destroy you, Diana." He reached the wooden steps of the stage, taking them 2 at a time. He raised his right hand, balling his fingers into a tight fist, his intent to physically remove me from the microphone undeniably clear. He intended to drag me off the platform by force, fueled by the delusional belief that silencing the messenger would somehow undo the message. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I stood at the acrylic podium, my posture unwavering, watching the architect of his own demise charge toward me. Bradley closed the final gap, his arm pulling back to strike. Before his hand could even graze the fabric of my emerald gown, a sound like a thunderclap shattered the remaining noise in the ballroom. The heavy oak doors at the main entrance of the estate burst open, slamming against the interior walls with a deafening, final crack. The sound of the heavy oak doors fracturing against the interior walls echoed like a gunshot through the silent reception hall. The momentum of the breach sent a shockwave across the room. Bradley froze. His raised fist halted mere inches from my face. The sheer kinetic force of the entrance paralyzed him, draining the feral rage from his eyes and replacing it with raw, unfiltered terror. He turned his head slowly toward the foyer, the muscles in his jaw twitching as the reality of his situation finally breached his fortified delusion. A flood of tactical uniforms poured into the estate. A dozen federal agents wearing dark Kevlar vests bearing the gold crest of the United States Department of Justice swarmed the entry hall, flanked by local municipal police officers. The strobe effect of the red and blue emergency lights mounted on the cruisers parked in the driveway pierced the darkness outside. The harsh, erratic flashes spilled through the open doorway, slicing across the opulent floral centerpieces and reflecting off the grand crystal chandeliers suspended above us. The warm, inviting glow of the charity gala instantly mutated into the stark, sterile illumination of an active crime scene. "Federal agents, remain exactly where you are," a commanding voice boomed over the rising din. The lead operative stepped over the threshold. Special Agent Sterling did not wear tactical gear. He wore a sharp charcoal suit tailored with the same exacting precision he applied to his financial prosecutions. He carried a leather folio tucked beneath his arm, radiating an aura of undeniable, lethal authority. His gaze swept the ballroom, calculating the threat level and identifying his targets with the cold efficiency of an apex predator. The high society guests occupying the reception hall descended into sheer panic. These were local titans of industry, managing partners of elite law firms, and prominent real estate developers. They spent their entire lives insulating themselves from the gritty, unseemly reality of law enforcement. They guarded their reputations with ruthless vigilance. Now they found themselves trapped inside a sealed perimeter, holding champagne flutes at a gathering actively targeted by a federal fraud division. The elegant facade of the evening disintegrated. The wealthy donors scrambled away from the stage, dropping their designer clutches and abandoning their checkbooks on the cocktail tables. The prominent philanthropist I observed earlier pushed past a waiter, desperate to reach the coat check. Another executive frantically tapped the screen of his smartphone, contacting his personal attorney to mitigate his accidental involvement in a sprawling criminal conspiracy. They recognized the toxic nature of the event. They understood that mere proximity to a federal indictment could trigger an audit of their own enterprises. They treated my brother and sister-in-law like walking contagions. Patricia attempted to intervene. My mother spent 6 decades operating under the assumption that her social standing functioned as an impenetrable shield against consequences. She believed her pearl necklace and her polished accent granted her immunity from the rules governing ordinary citizens. She stepped into the center aisle, planting herself directly in the path of the advancing federal task force. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Patricia shrieked, her voice shrill and trembling with unearned indignation. She raised her chin, attempting to project the matriarchal dominance she used to control our family. "This is a private residential gathering. You have no jurisdiction here. I demand you leave my home this instant before I contact the chief of police." Special Agent Sterling did not slow his pace. He did not issue a warning. He did not acknowledge her existence. He walked straight past her, his shoulder brushing against her tweed blazer, with enough force to send her stumbling backward into a marble pillar. Patricia gasped, clutching her chest as the remaining agents fanned out across the room, securing every exit and confiscating the laptops running the fraudulent digital donation portals. Her illusion of power shattered upon contact with genuine, uncompromising authority. Sterling approached the wooden steps leading up to the acrylic podium. Bradley remained rooted to the spot, his breathing shallow and erratic. The golden child who spent his entire adult life utilizing his mother's checkbook to escape the fallout of his incompetent business ventures finally encountered a problem he could not purchase his way out of. Jessica attempted to flee. The influencer realized her fabricated empire was collapsing in real time. She dropped her smartphone, abandoning her live stream, and darted toward the heavy velvet curtains concealing the rear exit of the stage. Her silver sequined gown caught on a microphone stand, sending the heavy metal pole crashing to the hardwood floor. Before she could take another step, 2 tactical agents flanked the curtain, blocking her escape route. "Place your hands behind your back," the taller agent ordered, his tone devoid of any sympathy. Jessica let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. She raised her trembling wrists, the harsh, metallic click of the steel restraints echoing across the silent ballroom. The sound severed the final thread of her curated, wealthy aesthetic. She was no longer a luxury lifestyle guru. She was a detained suspect awaiting transport to a federal holding cell. Sterling ascended the platform. He stopped 2 feet away from my brother. Bradley looked down at the federal prosecutor, his broad shoulders slumping in total defeat. He opened his mouth, searching for a persuasive pitch, a clever spin, or a sympathetic excuse. He found nothing. "Bradley Level," Sterling announced, his voice carrying the inescapable weight of the justice system. "You are under arrest." 2 local officers flanked my brother, grabbing his arms and twisting them behind his back with practiced, fluid motion. Bradley winced, his face flushing a deep, humiliated crimson as the cold steel cuffs locked around his wrists. He squeezed his eyes shut, unable to meet the gazes of the wealthy neighbors who were currently watching his spectacular downfall. Sterling unclasped his leather folio, extracting a thick stack of legal warrants bearing the official seal of a federal judge. He did not read the Miranda rights quietly. He projected his voice, ensuring every affluent donor in the room understood the exact nature of the swindle they had almost funded. "You and your wife are being charged with multiple federal offenses," Sterling recited, holding the document up to the light. "The charges include felony extortion, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud." The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. The crowd murmured in shocked recognition. "Furthermore," Sterling continued, turning his gaze toward the captured influencer standing near the curtain, "we possess the digital forensics proving you submitted a falsified residential lease to the Small Business Administration. You utilized a forged signature to pledge a property you do not own as collateral for a $250,000 commercial loan. You transmitted this fraudulent application across state lines, executing a coordinated scheme to defraud the United States government. The civil loophole you thought protected you is officially dead." Bradley sagged against the grip of the arresting officers, his knees buckled slightly, his body physically reacting to the crushing reality of a mandatory minimum prison sentence. The arrogant smirk he wore for 34 years was erased forever. The lead agent turned toward me. He offered a brief, respectful nod, acknowledging my role in supplying the meticulous corporate ledgers and encrypted communication logs that formed the foundation of his airtight indictment. I returned the gesture, my posture remaining rigid and serene. I had delivered the architects of my suffering directly into his hands. The officers began marching my brother and his wife toward the edge of the stage. The grand charity gala transitioned into a perp walk. As Bradley reached the wooden stairs, he looked over his shoulder, his eyes locking onto Jessica. The shared delusion that bound their toxic marriage together ruptured under the pressure of federal prosecution. Survival instincts replaced their manufactured affection. The golden child and the fraudulent influencer were about to discover that loyalty does not exist among thieves facing decades behind bars. The steel cuffs locked around Jessica's wrists produced a sharp clicking noise that echoed across the silent ballroom. The sound functioned as a definitive period at the end of their curated fairy tale. The wealthy attendees, the very audience my brother and his wife sought to impress, watched with unblinking fascination. High society thrives on scandal, provided it happens to someone else. Tonight, they received front-row seats to an unparalleled financial execution. Jessica twisted her shoulders, struggling futilely against the federal agent securing her restraints. The physical restrictions shattered her final veneer of composure. She whipped her head toward Bradley, her features contorted into a mask of pure betrayal. The manufactured affection they paraded on social media evaporated, replaced by the primal instinct of self-preservation. "This is your fault," Jessica shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the vaulted ceilings. "You told me the lease was a secure loophole. You instructed me to submit that application. You said no one would verify the property records. You ruined my life." Bradley flinched as her accusations hit him. The golden child, accustomed to unwavering adoration, stared at his wife in horror. He attempted to step toward her, but the two local officers held him firmly in place. "Keep your mouth shut," Bradley hissed, his tone dripping with venom. "You spent the loan money. You needed the designer wardrobe and the influencer aesthetics. You begged me to find a way to fund your pathetic brand. Do not pretend you are an innocent victim here." Special Agent Sterling stood a few feet away, observing their mutual destruction with the clinical detachment of a scientist watching bacteria multiply under a microscope. Criminal conspiracies rarely survive the introduction of federal handcuffs. Co-conspirators inevitably cannibalize one another the moment prison time becomes a tangible reality. Jessica continued to scream, detailing the specific dates Bradley drafted the forged documents, unknowingly providing the prosecution with a pristine verbal confession in front of dozens of prominent witnesses. Recognizing the catastrophic damage his wife was inflicting upon their legal defense, Bradley snapped his jaw shut. He ceased arguing with her. He frantically scanned the room, his eyes darting past the disgusted faces of the local elite until his gaze locked onto me. The arrogant swagger he carried for 34 years vanished into thin air. His knees buckled slightly, his broad shoulders collapsing under the invisible weight of the federal indictment. He looked remarkably like the terrified little boy who used to hide behind our mother whenever he broke an antique vase. Except today, Patricia could not shield him from the consequences. He dragged his feet across the hardwood floor, attempting to pull away from the arresting officers. "Diana, please," Bradley begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, trembling pitch. "You have to stop this. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them we had a verbal agreement regarding the tenancy." He strained against the officer's grip, his eyes welling with genuine tears. "We are family, Diana. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to a federal penitentiary. I will sign the deed over. I will leave the state. Just call off the agents. Please tell them to let me go." I stood motionless near the acrylic podium. The emerald silk of my gown brushed against the polished wood as I took a single, deliberate step toward him. I did not raise my voice. I did not project anger. I looked down at the man who had tormented me, stolen my future, and laughed at my pain. "A verbal agreement," I repeated, my tone as cold and unyielding as a glacial fault line. "You want me to commit perjury in front of a federal prosecutor to salvage the life you built on stolen capital." I tilted my head, studying his tear-streaked face. 7 years ago, you stood on the front porch of this very estate, I reminded him, ensuring every syllable landed with maximum impact. You watched me carry my belongings down the driveway in trash bags because you drained my college fund to lease exotic cars. Do you remember the specific parting words you offered me that afternoon, Bradley? He blinked rapidly, the color draining further from his cheeks. He remembered. You told me my degree was for losers, I stated the memory, crystal clear in my mind. You laughed and declared I would spend my life as a miserable desk clerk, while you conquered the entrepreneurial world. I gestured toward Special Agent Sterling and the thick leather folio tucked beneath his arm. That loser degree is called forensic accounting, I explained, delivering the revelation with surgical precision. It trained me to track hidden assets, unravel complex shell companies, and identify fraudulent loan applications. It provided me with the exact skill set required to audit your pathetic cryptocurrency scheme and trace the federal wire fraud you executed from my living room. I paused, allowing the gravity of the situation to settle over him. You were right, Bradley, I concluded, my gaze piercing straight through his shattered ego. I do spend my days analyzing ledgers, and your ledger is permanently bankrupt. Bradley opened his mouth to formulate another plea, but no sound materialized. The realization hit him with staggering force. The sister he deemed unworthy and unremarkable was the precise architect of his total ruin. He had handed me the tools of his destruction, and I had wielded them with flawless execution. Special Agent Sterling offered a curt nod to the arresting officers. Get them out of here, Sterling commanded, his patience entirely exhausted. The officers jerked Bradley backward, forcing him to turn around. Another pair of agents physically guided Jessica toward the main entrance. The perp walk commenced. They were marched down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. The wealthy donors, the individuals they desperately wished to impress, parted like the Red Sea. Whispers followed them, a chorus of high society judgment that would permanently bar them from any prestigious circle in Connecticut. The heavy oak doors stood wide open, framing the flashing emergency lights waiting in the driveway. Bradley stumbled as he crossed the threshold, his designer shoes scuffing against the brick steps. The cold autumn wind rushed inside, sweeping away the heavy, cloying scent of the imported orchids. I watched from the stage as the federal agents pressed a hand to the top of my brother's head, guiding him into the back of a fortified transport vehicle. Jessica was loaded into a separate cruiser, still crying over her ruined silver dress. The heavy doors of the police vehicles slammed shut, sealing their fate. The caravan of law enforcement shifted into gear, their tires crunching over the gravel as they rolled down the long, winding path toward the security gates. The golden child was gone, stripped of his wealth, his freedom, and his counterfeit legacy. The ballroom remained unnervingly quiet, the remaining guests too stunned to speak. I turned my gaze away from the empty doorway and scanned the room. There, standing alone near the far wall, was Patricia. The matriarch had watched her prized son carried away in restraints, and she knew her own reckoning had finally arrived. The flashing emergency lights faded into the night, casting long, retreating shadows across the manicured lawns. As the federal transport vehicles disappeared beyond the wrought iron gates, a profound silence descended upon the grand reception hall. The frantic, chaotic energy of the raid evaporated, leaving behind a stark, sterile reality. The wealthy donors, the titans of industry, and the local philanthropists wasted no time processing the scandal. They initiated a rapid, silent exodus. High society operates on a strict code of self-preservation. These individuals spent their entire lives insulating their reputations from the unseemly grit of law enforcement and financial ruin. They understood that mere proximity to a federal indictment could trigger an audit of their own enterprises. I stood near the acrylic podium, watching the Greenwich elite flee the estate. They abandoned their crystal champagne flutes on the cocktail tables. They dropped their designer clutches and hurried toward the coat check. The string quartet had already packed their instruments and slipped out the side door. In the center of the emptying ballroom stood Patricia. My mother spent 6 decades cultivating this specific social circle. She hosted garden luncheons, chaired historical preservation committees, and utilized her zip code as a titanium shield against accountability. She believed her pearl necklace and her polished accent granted her permanent immunity from the rules governing ordinary citizens. Tonight, that shield shattered into a million jagged pieces. I watched as Patricia reached out, attempting to grasp the arm of a prominent real estate developer's wife, a woman she had played tennis with every Tuesday for the last 10 years. The woman recoiled, snatching her arm away as if Patricia carried a lethal contagion. She averted her eyes, tightened her grip on her evening bag, and rushed through the heavy oak doors without a single word of farewell. The social death of Patricia Lovell occurred in real time. The guests did not merely leave her home. They erased her from their world. She was no longer a respected matriarch. She was the disgraced mother of a convicted felon, a woman who hosted a fraudulent charity gala using stolen funds. She was radioactive. Within 10 minutes, the ballroom was entirely empty of guests. Special Agent Sterling and his tactical team were wrapping up evidence collection in the West Wing, securing the laptops and financial documents that would cement my brother's prison sentence. The main hall belonged solely to the two of us. The aesthetic of the charity event looked grotesque in the aftermath. The imported white orchids wilted under the harsh glare of the remaining stage lights. The metallic drapery hung limp against the walls. The digital projection screens still displayed the heartbreaking logo for the fake Legal Defense Fund, a glowing monument to their breathtaking hubris. Patricia stood near the stone fireplace. Her vintage designer suit, an ensemble meticulously chosen to project an aura of old money, suddenly appeared oversized and pathetic. Her shoulders caved inward. The rigid, haughty posture she used to control our family dissolved. She looked around the cavernous room, her eyes darting from the abandoned cocktail tables to the open front doors, letting the cold autumn wind sweep through the foyer. She turned her gaze toward me. The woman who spent my entire life dismissing my ambitions, mocking my education, and funding my brother's delusions, finally recognized the architect of her ruin. She did not storm the stage. She did not raise her voice or issue another pathetic threat. The fight was drained from her veins. She took a slow, trembling step toward the podium, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood. "Diana," Patricia whispered, her voice cracking into a raw, hollow sound. She closed the distance, stopping at the base of the wooden stairs. Then, the matriarch of the Lovell family did something I never thought possible. She collapsed. Her knees buckled, and she dropped to the polished floor. She cried real tears. These were not the performative, manipulated sobs she utilized to control Bradley or to garner sympathy from her country club friends. These were tears of genuine, unfiltered terror. Diana, please, she begged, pressing her manicured hands against her face, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. You cannot do this. You have made your point. You sent him away. You took the house. But you cannot throw me out into the street. I am your mother. I stepped down from the elevated platform. The emerald silk of my gown rustled softly in the quiet room. I stopped 2 feet away from her kneeling form, looking down at the ruined makeup streaking her cheeks. I felt no anger. The fiery resentment that fueled me during my early 20s had long since burned out, replaced by a surgical, icy detachment. I have nowhere to go, Patricia pleaded, lifting her tear-stained face to meet my unwavering gaze. The banks froze my residual accounts. Bradley drained my retirement funds. My credit is destroyed. I do not have a single dollar to my name. Let me stay in the guest house. I will be quiet. I will not bother you. You have so much space here. Please, Diana, I am begging you for mercy. I studied her desperate expression, dissecting the anatomy of her plea. She invoked her title as a mother, hoping the biological connection would override my logic. She assumed that underneath my corporate exterior, the frightened, discarded 25-year-old girl still existed, yearning for maternal approval. You do not seek mercy, Patricia, I stated, my tone calm and resonant, cutting through her hysterical weeping. You seek a comfortable hiding place from the consequences of your own choices. I tilted my head, examining the sheer hypocrisy of her request. 7 years ago, I reminded her, ensuring every syllable carried the weight of empirical truth. You stood on the front porch and watched me drag my belongings down the driveway in heavy plastic trash bags. I had no savings. I had student loans you refused to co-sign. I begged you for a single month of rent to secure an apartment near my university. Patricia squeezed her eyes shut, flinching as the memory surfaced. Do you recall your response, I asked, forcing her to confront her own history. You told me that supporting a failure was a poor investment. You declared that your capital was reserved for Bradley, the visionary entrepreneur. You handed him the keys to your ruin, Patricia. You funded his delusion because it mirrored your own. You preferred a comfortable lie to an uncomfortable truth. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the finality of my words settle over her. Enduring abuse is not a requirement of love, I explained, delivering the defining verdict of our relationship. You severed our familial bond the day you financed his ego with my future. You are not my mother today. You are a trespassing tenant on a foreclosed commercial asset. I raised my right hand, offering a brief, silent signal toward the shadows of the grand foyer. 2 men wearing dark, tailored suits emerged from the corridor. They were not local police officers. They were members of my private security detail, a highly trained extraction team I retained to secure the perimeter after the federal agents concluded their raid. The lead contractor stepped forward, pushing a sleek, black polycarbonate suitcase across the marble floor. The smooth, rhythmic hum of the wheels rolling against the stone echoed in the silent reception hall. He brought the suitcase to a halt just inches from Patricia. During the federal raid, I instructed my security team to visit the master suite, I informed her, gesturing toward the luggage. They packed your heavy winter coats, your essential toiletries, and a sensible pair of walking shoes. Everything else inside this estate, the antique furniture, the silver frames, the art on the walls, belongs to my holding company to satisfy the defaulted debt you accrued. Patricia stared at the black suitcase, her breath hitching in her throat. You are forcing me to walk, she whispered, the horrifying reality dawning on her. I do not even have a car. The agents impounded Jessica's leased vehicle. I will freeze. It is dark outside. You have a heavy coat, I replied, my voice devoid of any lingering sympathy. The walk to the main road is exactly 1.2 miles. It is the same exact distance I walked 7 years ago, carrying my textbooks in the rain. I suggest you start moving. I nodded to the security contractors. They did not touch her. They simply stepped behind her, forming a wall of silent, intimidating enforcement. Their presence provided the unmistakable directive that her time inside the fortress had expired. Patricia realized the negotiation was over. There were no more tears to shed, no more lies to spin, and no golden child left to manipulate. She reached out with trembling fingers, grasping the retractable handle of the suitcase. She pulled herself up from the hardwood floor, her knees shaking under the weight of her total defeat. She did not look at me again. She turned her back on the opulent ballroom, dragging the rolling luggage toward the open front doors. The crisp autumn wind whipped through the entryway, lifting the hem of her designer suit. I stood in the center of the grand reception hall, watching her cross the threshold. The wheels of the suitcase clattered against the brick steps, a harsh, erratic sound that faded as she reached the gravel driveway. The darkness of the Connecticut night swallowed her silhouette, leaving her to navigate the long, winding path entirely alone, stripped of her wealth, her pride, and her legacy. The security team stepped forward, grasping the brass handles of the heavy oak double doors. They pushed them shut, the heavy wood sealing with a resounding, definitive click. The cold air was cut off, and the estate fell into a deep, unbroken quiet. The long, suffocating shadow of the Lovell family was permanently excised from the property. The morning sun crested the tree line of the Greenwich estate, casting long, pale beams of light across the frost-covered lawns. I stood in the center of the grand foyer, holding a steaming cup of dark roast coffee. The air inside the house felt remarkably different. The suffocating tension, the desperate facade of unearned wealth, the heavy scent of imported orchids. They were all gone. The space belonged entirely to me. At precisely 7 o'clock, a fleet of pristine white commercial vans turned into the gravel driveway. I did not hire a standard cleaning service. I retained a premium architectural restoration crew. They were specialists trained in preserving historic properties and erasing the negligent damage inflicted by careless occupants. The lead contractor stepped through the front entrance, carrying a digital tablet and a clipboard, ready to execute my exact specifications. I directed the crew through the first floor. We began with the reception hall. I watched with profound satisfaction as the workers dismantled the theatrical production my sister-in-law left behind. They stripped the shimmering metallic drapery from the crown molding, revealing the original hand-carved woodwork beneath. They hauled the withered floral centerpieces, the cheap acrylic podium, and the digital projection screens out the back door, tossing the remnants of the fraudulent charity gala directly into an industrial dumpster. The restoration extended beyond mere aesthetics. I ordered the crew to pull up the synthetic rugs Jessica placed over the original hardwood. I instructed the carpenters to repair the deep gouges Bradley left in the mahogany door frames when he heedlessly dragged his luggage inside weeks prior. We scrubbed the residue of their delusion from every corner of the property. With each piece of garbage removed, the estate seemed to exhale. The historic architecture emerged from beneath the gaudy decorations, standing tall and dignified once more. As the crew worked seamlessly around me, my encrypted mobile device vibrated on the kitchen island. The caller identification displayed a secure federal routing number. I answered the line, acknowledging Prosecutor Sterling. He did not call to offer pleasantries. He called to deliver the final arithmetic of my family ruin. Sterling informed me that the initial arraignment hearing concluded 30 minutes ago in a downtown federal courthouse. The judge reviewed the staggering mountain of evidence we provided, the forged residential lease, the digital IP logs, the illicit crowdfunding transfers, and the recorded public solicitation of funds. Recognizing the severe flight risk and the undeniable weight of the financial crimes, the magistrate denied bail. My brother traded his custom-tailored linen shirts for a standard-issue detention uniform. The golden child who spent his entire life failing upward, relying on a maternal safety net to catch his every mistake, finally hit the concrete floor of reality. He faced a mandatory minimum sentence stretching over a decade. He would spend the remainder of his youth confined to a federal penitentiary, stripped of his name, his luxury vehicles, and his unearned pride. Jessica fared no better. Her influencer empire collapsed overnight, transforming from a curated lifestyle brand into a digital cautionary tale. Federal investigators seized her social media accounts, freezing her assets and auditing every single transaction she executed over the past 5 years. The followers she desperately sought to impress were now acting as witnesses for the prosecution, submitting screenshots of her fraudulent fundraising campaign to the authorities. The high society fantasy she attempted to steal vanished, leaving her facing the identical federal conspiracy charges as her husband. I ended the call and set the device down on the polished marble counter. I felt no sorrow. I felt no regret. I processed the information with the clinical precision of a senior auditor closing a highly complex ledger. The columns aligned perfectly. The debts were settled. The toxic liabilities were permanently liquidated from my personal and professional portfolio. I walked away from the kitchen, leaving the restoration crew to their tasks. I ascended the sweeping mahogany staircase, my footsteps echoing softly in the quiet hall. I bypassed the guest rooms and walked straight into the master suite. The space was expansive, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the sprawling Connecticut landscape. I crossed the room and unlocked the heavy glass doors, stepping out onto the private stone balcony. The crisp autumn wind brushed against my face, carrying the sharp, clean scent of pine and turning leaves. I gripped the stone balustrade, looking out over the manicured gardens and the pristine driveway below. The flashing emergency lights, the federal transport vehicles, the fleeing high society donors, they were merely memories now. The property was a fortress of tranquility. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, allowing the rich, bitter warmth to ground me in the present moment. 7 years ago, I stood at the end of this exact driveway, trembling and heartbroken. I believed the lie my mother and brother told me. I believed my education was worthless and my future was bleak. I allowed their cruel judgment to dictate my self-worth. Standing on the balcony today, I recognize the profound power of my own resilience. I did not inherit this estate. I did not marry into this wealth. I earned every single brick, every blade of grass, and every pane of glass through relentless, unwavering dedication. I built a corporate empire in the shadows, mastering the very financial systems my family attempted to manipulate. The suffocating weight of their expectations, the constant demand to shrink myself to accommodate their fragile egos, disappeared forever. The estate was no longer a symbol of my exclusion. It transformed into the ultimate monument to my survival. Society conditions us to accept intolerable behavior simply because the perpetrators share our genetic code. We are told to forgive, to turn the other cheek, and to maintain the peace at the expense of our own sanity. We are taught that family is an unbreakable bond demanding infinite sacrifices. My journey dismantled that dangerous myth. Blood merely makes you related. It is a biological accident carrying no inherent obligation. Respect, loyalty, and mutual care are the true currencies that create a family. When a relationship requires you to finance a delusion, to endure constant belittlement, or to sacrifice your dignity, it ceases to be a family. It becomes a parasite. Severing ties with toxic individuals, even those who raised you, is never an act of cruelty. It is a vital, necessary act of self-preservation. You possess the sovereign right to determine who gains access to your energy, your resources, and your home. Setting ironclad boundaries protects your future from those who seek to drain it. I learned that you do not need to scream to win a war. You do not need to fight a smear campaign in the comments section or argue with a narcissist in a crowded foyer. The most devastating response to profound disrespect is silent, undeniable success. You let them build their house of cards. You secure your own foundation, and you wait for the wind to blow. Thank you for listening to my story on Sophia Told Stories. If you have ever faced the agonizing decision to walk away from a toxic dynamic to protect your peace and your future, I want to hear from you. Share your experience in the comments below. Tell me about the hardest boundary you ever established and how it changed your trajectory. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if this journey resonated with your own. You are the architect of your own life. Never allow anyone to convince you that your degree, your ambition, or your truth is worthless. Build your empire in silence, protect your sanctuary, and always know your true, undeniable worth. Realizing that sharing biological genetics never guarantees unconditional loyalty, nor requires enduring endless exploitation, we must understand how parasitic relatives frequently cloak their toxic greed behind a sacred veil of familial duty, demanding infinite sacrifices to finance reckless delusions, while simultaneously mocking the disciplined ambition needed for building genuine stability. An observation which ultimately imparts a profound philosophical truth regarding self-preservation, teaching us that supreme liberation is achieved not by engaging in chaotic public shouting matches, defending oneself against digital smear campaigns, or begging for validation from those determined to misunderstand you, but rather through the quiet, meticulous cultivation of unassailable triumph, thereby forging an impenetrable fortress around your boundaries where inner peace reigns uninterrupted, effectively allowing manipulative grifters who weaponize guilt and fabricate fraudulent realities to orchestrate their own devastating downfall via unchecked hubris alongside fatal legal miscalculations, demonstrating definitively that while DNA merely renders individuals related, consistent mutual respect actually constructs a true home, teaching us to ruthlessly sever ties with energy vampires who drain emotional reserves and squander generational wealth without feeling any remorse, because protecting your hard-earned sanctuary remains paramount above all societal expectations, meaning you hold sovereign authority over who gets access to your life, your resources, and your mental clarity. So as you reflect upon this transformative journey of reclaiming stolen power, dismantling the heavy chains of conditional affection, and legally evicting the very architects of your childhood suffering in order to secure a pristine, quiet future free from manipulation, please drop a comment below sharing the hardest boundary you have ever had to set, hit the like icon, subscribe to our channel, and join our growing, empowered community right here at Sophia Told Stories for more captivating tales about fiercely defending your dignity against anyone attempting to diminish your undeniable worth, ensuring that moving forward into tomorrow untold chapters, every single viewer listening today internalizes the empowering realization that walking away from chronic disrespect is never an act of cruelty, but rather the most exquisite form of radical self-love imaginable.